On the day following my passing, my mother forwarded to me a newly released provincial civil service examination announcement. Time slipped away quietly, yet my response never came. Subsequently, she made several phone calls, but the other end of the line remained unanswered. My mother was filled with rage and called me an ungrateful wretch. My father, upon seeing this, furrowed his brows and said, "After studying for so many years, not having a proper job, I'm ashamed to mention it to others." But they were unaware that I had already departed from this world. Today is my younger brother's graduation ceremony. My parents, dressed in washed-out white suits and holding a bouquet of flowers, stepped into my brother's school. My sister is so heartless. She didn't even come on such an important day for me, my brother muttered softly after receiving the bouquet, seeing only our parents arrive. "Leave her alone. She can do as she pleases," my father said. And then he and my mother, arm in arm with my brother, walked towards the campus. My brother, with a beaming face, led our parents to the photo-taking spots, introducing from time to time the campus where he had lived for 4 years. I stared intently at the expressions on my parents' faces. They listened with extreme concentration, as if afraid of missing any detail. Such a warm and beautiful scene had never occurred to me. I silently followed them walking together. They visited the teaching building, the cafeteria, the playground, and the library. My parents greeted the teachers and classmates they met on the way politely. Anyone who saw them would think this was a loving family. However, I, standing aside, only felt an overwhelming sense of nausea. While taking pictures, they casually talked about me. "When will my sister pass the civil service examination? It would be great if she could get married as soon as she passes, so that I can use her betrothal gifts for my own marriage." Xiaomin has been constantly talking to me about getting married recently, and I don't dare to respond directly. "I don't know what's wrong with your sister these 2 years. She used to have such good grades. Why did she fail in the civil service examination? But don't worry, even if she doesn't pass, she can still get some betrothal gifts when she gets married, just a little less." "How can it be less? I don't have a formal job yet. If the house isn't big enough and the betrothal gifts are insufficient, I won't be able to pass Xiaomin's parents." Looking at the people closest to me in this world, who casually manipulated my life as if I were an object, I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. My parents had eyes only for my younger brother. My younger brother had only himself in his heart, and I became the first victim of their pursuit of interests. Since I could remember, I had sensed that my parents didn't like me. The family was in financial straits. When they learned that the first child was a daughter, my parents' expressions immediately turned cold, and they thought they had to have another child. Finally, when I was 5 years old, my younger brother was born. I remember when my younger brother was born, the furrowed brows of my father outside the delivery room gradually relaxed. My younger brother was born, under the eager anticipation of my parents. At that time, I was too young and my mind was not yet mature. I didn't understand why my parents had completely different expressions when facing me and my younger brother. When they faced me, there was always an indelible sense of estrangement in their eyes. But when facing my younger brother, there was only full-hearted joy and love. I also yearned for my parents' love. I didn't need as much as my younger brother, just a little bit would be enough. So, I began to learn to take good care of my younger brother like them, hoping that my parents could see my kindness and love me more. However, I was too young at that time, and often found myself unable to do what I wanted. My good intentions always turned out to be bad deeds, which instead made my parents dislike me even more. I would save the pocket money, given by my parents to buy toys for my younger brother. But my younger brother always got scratched by the toys accidentally. I would help my parents feed my younger brother, but my younger brother was always restless while eating. He would reach out and knock over the bowl, splashing the soup on himself, and then bursting into tears. I would take my younger brother out to play, and buy him delicious food with my saved New Year's money. But because my younger brother was too young, he would have diarrhea after eating something unclean outside. Every time, I would be scolded by my parents. Over time, such things accumulated too much. My parents attributed these accidents to my jealousy of my younger brother, believing that I was trying every means to make my younger brother uncomfortable. They no longer allowed me to have too much contact with my younger brother. It turns out that those who are not loved find it difficult to receive love no matter what they do. Just because I am who I am, everything I do is wrong. Later, I no longer expected to obtain my parents' love by pleasing my younger brother, and turned to studying hard instead. In the matter of study, it seemed that heaven particularly favored me. I had a strong learning ability, and my grades were always among the best from primary school to high school. Whenever I returned home excitedly with my report cards and awards, my parents would only nod indifferently, and the smiles on their faces were no different from usual. But their attitude towards my younger brother was completely different. As long as my younger brother made a little progress, my father would happily spin him around in his arms, and my mother would go to the vegetable market to buy hairy crabs, saying she wanted to celebrate. But most of the time, my younger brother could hardly pass the exams. Whenever there was a happy event at home, hairy crabs would be bought. They were my younger brother's favorite food, and I was allergic to hairy crabs. I didn't understand why my parents didn't like me. I was very competitive. Without ever attending tutoring classes, I was admitted to a good university. When I checked my college entrance examination scores, I was so excited that I couldn't wait to share this joy with my parents. But I didn't know that my younger brother was hospitalized due to illness that day. The moment I found out my scores, just as I was about to call my mother excitedly, my parents came home. I was so excited that I danced with joy and kept talking about how well I had done in the exam. However, my father, with a worried look on his face, suddenly turned fierce and shouted at me, "You only care about your own happiness. Your younger brother fainted at school today, and you don't even care or ask a word. How did we raise such a selfish daughter?" My mother, who had taken care of my younger brother in the hospital all day, looked exhausted. She didn't even glance at me, and went straight into the room to rest. I stood there looking dazed and at a loss. Throughout the entire day, I confined myself within the room, my heart brimming with anxiety over my grades. Strangely enough, no one called to inform me of any news regarding my younger brother. Fortunately, the scores were higher than I had anticipated, which truly delighted me for a while. The arduous study day in and day out for a decade seemed to have finally borne the sweetest fruit. However, this joy, I only desired to share with the closest people to me. Initially, I intended to finish talking about my grades first, and then inquire about my younger brother's situation. But the words, once reaching my lips, were swallowed back. There had been far too many similar scenarios in the past. Uttering even one more word seemed like a futile effort. My parents were extremely occupied with their work, and could barely spare any time. Thus, during the summer vacation prior to my freshman year of college, I was simultaneously working as a cashier at a supermarket, and taking care of my younger brother in the hospital. The earnings from the 3-month cashier job were barely sufficient to cover my tuition for the first year of college, and the living expenses for the first month. I was well aware that the family's financial condition was not good. Since childhood, apart from necessities for study and daily life, I scarcely ever made extra requests to my parents. After entering college, I worked part-time to support my studies, and never asked my family for money again. My parents seemingly were quite satisfied with my sensible and diligent nature. Indeed, my actions had alleviated their burdens to a great extent. But was it merely their satisfaction that I desired? No, what I yearned for was their love. I had always strived to be an obedient and sensible daughter. Even though my parents were content with my efforts, the way they looked at me never held the same kind of doting as they had for my younger brother. There was only a faint sense of estrangement. My younger brother could obtain all of my parents' love without doing anything, while I, having exerted all my efforts and living an exhausted life, they still remained indifferent to me and reluctant to get close to me. During my senior year of college, when my mother saw me worrying about job hunting, she suggested, "You should take the civil service examination. The job is stable, and it's most suitable for girls." I grasped this as if it were a life-saving straw and impulsively agreed. In fact, taking the civil service examination was not my original intention. I had always harbored a dream of becoming a florist. Those colorful flowers could always make me temporarily forget the bitterness of life. But I thought that if I could pass the civil service examination as my mother wished, perhaps I could gain my parents' love. If I liked flowers, I could buy some and place them at home. Looking at them frequently could also bring me happiness. It wasn't necessarily essential to become a florist. Thus, after this self-persuasion, I easily gave up the dream I had adhered to for many years. However, taking the civil service examination was by no means easy. With the poor economic situation, everyone sought stability and joined the army of civil service examination candidates. The competition became increasingly fierce, and the admission ratio was even as low as 1 in 6,000. I spent 2 full years preparing for the exam full-time, yet I was still eliminated in the interview. During the preparation period, the savings I had accumulated from working part-time throughout my 4-year college life were completely exhausted. Helplessly, after a 6-year interval, I once again asked my family for living expenses. "You've always been good at studying, haven't you? Why haven't you passed the civil service examination after 2 years? If you don't want to work, and just want to mooch off your parents at home, just say so." My father scolded while throwing 600 yuan at me. From then on, I decided to no longer prepare for the exam full-time. I found a job not far from home, and continued to review after work. In my heart, the civil service examination gradually became a bargaining chip to obtain my parents' love. In order to get that love, I seemed to have fallen into an obsession. Nevertheless, human energy is limited. After starting work, the time available for studying and preparing for the exam each day was significantly reduced. Later, I didn't even get the chance for an interview. The way my parents looked at me became increasingly disdainful. Growing up in an environment lacking love for a long time, I was diagnosed with moderate depression during my sophomore year. The psychologist advised me to try communicating with my parents, stop making unfounded speculations, and ask them why they didn't like me. She said that my psychological problem was not the civil service examination, but my parents' indifference towards me. However, every time I attempted to communicate with my parents, they were always impatient and unwilling to listen to me for even 2 minutes. Eventually, I gave up and could only fight against depression alone. Later, the civil service examination became my last hope. I thought that if I grasped it, I could get better. Little did I know that it was actually a death knell. The long-term repressed study in life, the huge pressure of the civil service examination, and the extreme longing for my parents' love gradually crushed me. I, who was originally only moderately depressed, under the superimposition of the pressure of the civil service examination, developed severe depression. I started to lose my appetite, couldn't sleep, and lost interest in everything, including the flowers I once loved the most. But I still persisted in working, because I really didn't want to ask my family for money anymore. After all, it was not easy for my parents to earn money. During that period, I lost a great deal of weight. My cheeks became sunken, and I had no energy at all. Eventually, I gave up on the civil service examination, and no longer expected to obtain my parents' love. I wanted to live. I was only 26 years old. I had never lived for myself in the previous 26 years. When my life was threatened, I suddenly realized that life shouldn't be like this. I no longer clung to my parents' love. It was too heavy for me to bear. I actively cooperated with the treatment and took medicine on time, full of anticipation that after I recovered, life would get better. Would it be like that? Just then, my younger brother also reached his senior year. One evening, my younger brother and I happened to be having dinner at home. At the dinner table, my mother brought up the civil service examination again. I responded numbly, as if both perfunctory and reluctantly compromising. Seeing my indifferent attitude, and considering the failures of the previous 2 years, my mother determined that I was fooling them, and not really preparing for the exam. She suddenly shouted at me, "Look at you. You're already 26 years old, and still don't have a proper job. Once a girl passes the prime age of 25, she's not valuable anymore. Without a decent job, who will want you in the future?" Her sharp and ear-piercing voice and hurtful words made me want to flee. I didn't refute or argue. I just stared at my mother quietly for a few seconds, then pulled the corners of my mouth into a mocking smile. Subsequently, I gently put down my chopsticks and left the house. "Fine, you've grown up and become independent. If you leave this house, don't come back. We might as well consider not having you as a daughter." My mother's voice came from behind, but at this moment I no longer cared. I came home for dinner merely to fulfill the obligation of a child to visit home often. From then on, I still went to work during the day and returned to my small 30-square-meter rental apartment at night as usual. I no longer yearned for my parents' love. It was too luxurious, as if it never belonged to me. Life went on mechanically like this. The only change was that under the effect of the medicine, I became fatter and fatter. However, even so, my mental state did not improve because of taking the medicine. At this moment, I was like a machine on the verge of falling apart. With just a gentle touch, even just a single screw, I would instantly collapse and turn into a pile of useless scrap metal. And my younger brother was precisely the one who touched that screw. Since my parents didn't allow me to have too much contact with my younger brother when I was a child, I seldom took the initiative to play with him. But he suddenly called me, and brought up the civil service examination again. The emotions that had been pent up for years finally erupted completely at this moment. Why? Why are you all forcing me to take the civil service examination? Is the meaning of my life just to take this exam? Why don't you take it yourself instead of asking me to? My younger brother, seeing me, who was always gentle, getting so angry at him, retorted mercilessly, "Isn't that exactly your value? If you have a good job, and then go on a blind date and get married, won't it be easier to negotiate the betrothal gifts? I'm planning to get married, and our parents' meager savings are not enough to buy me a house. Without your betrothal gifts, how can I get married? How can you be so selfish? Sisters and other families selflessly contribute everything for their younger brothers and families. We're just asking you to take an exam. Also, can't you lose some weight? You probably eat too well on a daily basis. A girl being as fat as a pig, which man will like you? I felt disgusted when I saw you at dinner that day." After saying that, he hung up the phone. Hearing these words, I was stunned. The "we" he mentioned actually didn't include me. So it had always been like this. Did my parents want me to take the civil service examination, just to sell me at a good price? Did my younger brother dislike my being fat, because he was afraid that I wouldn't be able to get married, and it would affect his own marriage? I couldn't help but laugh out loud, laughing at how stupid I was. Years of effort had ultimately turned out to be a joke. The love I had always thought I could obtain was just a figment of my imagination. There had never been any if. For those who are not loved, everything they do is in vain. I laughed even louder. It turned out that so many years of dedication had been nothing but self-indulgence. The things I had desperately wanted, and the dreams I had worked hard for over the years had ultimately come to nothing. In this world, the people who should have loved me the most had never loved me. I was tired of this place that only brought me pain. Perhaps I really came to the wrong world. This place didn't belong to me. I should return to the place that belongs to me. I found an abandoned building in the suburbs. I heard that one must jump from the 6th floor, or above to be certain to die. So I went to the 7th floor. For a person as fat as me, climbing 7 floors was really tiring. But I didn't hesitate at all. Panting, I climbed to the top floor. Looking back on my life of more than 20 years, my eyes were already blurred with tears. Soon everything will come to an end. After tonight, all the pain will fade away along with my life. Standing at the edge of the 7th floor and looking down, I felt not a shred of fear, only an unprecedented sense of relief. Without the slightest hesitation, I leaned forward and leaped. At last I was dead. No longer did I have to be the stepping stone for my brother's marriage, nor live with such caution, nor wait for myself for that unattainable love. After my death, I returned to the home that had broken my heart. I saw my mother, her head bowed as she stared at her phone, murmuring something. After a while, she raised her head, her brow furrowed, and said, Ran was so brilliant when she was studying. Why is it so hard for her to pass the civil service exam? If she didn't want to take it, she should have said so earlier. Why drag it out? My father beside her, while playing with his phone, chimed in. She's read so many books but still doesn't have a proper job. She's out there every day, not knowing what she's up to. We really raised her in vain. Mom and Dad, what's for lunch? I'm starving. Hurry up and cook. My brother yawned as he emerged from his room, stretching his body. Then he plopped down on the sofa and turned on his game. All you do is play games at home every day. You finished your graduation thesis, but don't even think about looking for a job. My mother scolded as she walked into the kitchen to start cooking my brother's favorite hairy crabs. Where's sister? I haven't seen her for ages. Is she really that heartless and won't come home? My brother asked casually, his eyes fixed on the screen. Who knows? Raising a daughter is really not as good as raising a son. Just asked her a bit about the exam that day, and she turned into an enemy. She's such an ungrateful wretch, my father said, his face contorted. Looking at his appearance, I only found it ridiculous. They had long forgotten the harm they had done to me over the years. As long as I didn't go along with their wishes, even a little, I would end up like this. Since I was young, I helped my mother with housework and brought meals to my working father. I never asked my parents to buy me expensive things. All my clothes were bought on discount. Since the first year of junior high school, my scholarship could cover my tuition fees. Since the first year of college, I rarely asked for money from home. While other girls were out playing in beautiful dresses, I was doing part-time jobs. I had no rebellious phase, no adolescence. The best years of my college life were also extremely exhausting. I was so sensible only because I knew how hard my parents worked and wanted to make their lives easier. But now, as long as I showed the slightest resistance, I became the ungrateful person in their mouths. It was truly absurd. Mom, transfer me another 5,000 yuan, my brother said. My father frowned. Didn't we just give you 3,000 last week? I spend money on dating, and your money will be mine sooner or later. What's the difference in when you give it to me? Oh, stop nagging and transfer it to me quickly. I'm going out, my brother urged impatiently. Without a second thought, my mother directly opened WeChat and transferred the money to my brother. So the family wasn't actually short of money. They just didn't want to spend it on me. After my brother finished eating, he went out. The dining table was piled high with the crab shells he had left. My mother had clearly placed a napkin beside him, probably hoping he would put the crab shells on it and not make a mess all over the table. But he completely ignored it. However, my brother still went his own way. The crab shells were thrown everywhere, creating a mess. After the meal, he neither cleared the trash he had created nor collected the bowls and chopsticks. Suddenly, my mother's phone rang loudly. The screen showed my call. My mother grabbed the phone, her anger flaring up instantly. She shouted into the receiver. So you still remember you have a mother? You. Before she could finish, a steady male voice came from the other end of the line. Hello, is this Ms. Ning Sui? This morning, we found a young woman who committed suicide by jumping off a building in the suburbs. We found this phone on her. Judging from the notes on the phone, you should be the mother of the phone owner. Would you and your family be convenient to come to the police station? Once upon a time, I had asked myself countless times in my heart why, no matter how hard I tried, I could hardly win a bit of my parents' attention. It seemed that there was always only my brother in their eyes. I couldn't help but imagine that if I died like this, would my parents feel a bit of regret and shed even a single tear for me? At this moment, I finally got the answer. After the police officer finished speaking, my mother was surprisingly calm. She muttered to herself, how could this be? Ramran has always been so strong. Since she was a child, she's never given us any trouble. Just because she failed the civil service exam, how could she come to this extreme? You'll understand when you come to the police station, the other party said. My mother hung up the phone, her eyes vacant, not knowing what she was thinking. My father also seemed to be in a daze, his brow still furrowed. They hurriedly put down their chopsticks and headed to the police station. On the way, they didn't forget to call my brother and tell him to go directly to the police station. When they entered the police station, 2 police officers received them. The older police officer first comforted my parents softly and then led them to identify my body. I silently followed them, standing opposite them, but they could neither see me nor hear me. When my mother saw me, her legs gave way, and she thumped down onto the ground, repeating mechanically, Why? My father supported my mother at the side, his eyes dull, as if he had lost his focus. Sister is so selfish. Mom and Dad have raised her for so many years. She could finally work and repay the family, but she chose to jump off a building. She didn't consider Mom, Dad, or me at all. My brother complained indignantly. Hearing this, my father suddenly stood up and slapped my brother hard, sternly saying, She's your sister. You shouldn't talk about her like that. My brother froze instantly, a trace of sadness and resentment flashing in his eyes. Seeing this scene, I couldn't help but sneer. My parents had always regarded my brother as the apple of their eye. I never expected that there would be a day when they would hit him because of me. If during my lifetime, they had ever stood up for me even once, perhaps today's tragedy would not have happened. Father, mother, I hate you. I couldn't help but wonder whether their current sadness was because they had lost their only daughter, or because they were lamenting the betrothal gifts they could no longer get. Probably the latter. After coming out of the police station, they came to my rental house to collect my belongings. After graduating, I had been living here. At first, I was preparing for the exam full-time, and later, I didn't move even after starting work. When they opened the door, the first thing that came into view was the desk piled high with books and notes, which carried the bits and pieces of my long-term exam preparation days. My mother casually picked up the most worn-out reference book, slowly sat down on my bed, and began to flip through it page by page. It was a book of administrative aptitude test questions. When opened, the dense notes and my random thoughts were revealed. The content covered in the administrative aptitude test is so extensive, quite different from my major. Come on. I went home for dinner today. The sweet and sour pork ribs my mother made were so delicious. I have to keep working hard and not let Mom and Dad down. Yeah, I studied for 12 hours today and did a lot of questions. I'm sure I can pass. I failed the first exam. It doesn't matter. I'll definitely make it next time. My savings are almost used up. Is it not good to ask Mom for some money? After all, it's not easy for Mom and Dad to make money. I found a job today. It's hard, but it's no different from preparing for the exam full-time. I was scolded by the boss today. She said I'm a useless person and regretted hiring me. Is that really the case? After studying for so many years, it seems I've really turned myself into a person who can only take exams. Now I can't even do this small thing of taking an exam well. I'm a bit tired today. That's enough studying. If I don't pass, will Mom and Dad be completely disappointed in me? I didn't even make it to the interview this time. My brother said that the meaning of my existence is to get betrothal gifts for Mom and Dad when I get married. Mom and Dad, is that true? Mom and Dad, no matter how hard I try, will you still not love me? Finally, my mother raised her head, and I saw a tear rolling down her cheek. My mother suddenly turned to my brother and asked, Did you say something to your sister? My brother looked flustered, his eyes dodging, as if he realized something. My mother continued to ask, Did you tell your sister that her meaning in the family is to buy a house for your marriage? My brother lowered his head and mumbled softly, Didn't you tell me that? You said that when sister passes the civil service exam and gets married, we can use her betrothal gifts to buy a house for my marriage. My mother fell silent instantly. Yes, she had indeed said those words.